Hello and welcome everyone to this session of Net Zero Week, which is brought to you in partnership with YPO and iNetwork. My name is Louis Stockwell. I'm the coordinator for iNetwork's Connected Procurement and Commissioning Programme, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar on the topic of recyclable materials and product switching, and really the roles that these can play as we're moving towards meeting our collective net zero targets. So specifically really in this session today, we wanted to explore the different priorities across the public and private sectors when it comes to switching to lower carbon materials, recyclable materials, and just looking at how colleagues have been starting to accomplish this really, and also the crucial role that the procurement has to play in that. We'll also consider some of the key challenges of product switching and switching to more environmentally friendly materials and discuss how these can be overcome and whether we can really sort of justify different costs as well of different materials as we move towards that more environmentally friendly outcomes. So a fair bit to unpack, I think, today then, but really fortunately for me, we've got some great guest speakers here to help talk us through this. So really delighted to be joined today by three speakers who've really kindly given up their time in very busy schedules to come and talk today about this really important issue. So I will let each of our speakers kind of introduce themselves in a bit more detail as they talk about the work that they're doing. But just by way of a very quick introduction, it's a real pleasure to be joined by Gillian Askew. Gillian has over 25 years experience working in procurement across public and private sectors. Gillian is currently Director of the Social Enterprise, All Things Procurement, and Go for Growth support services as well, which helps smaller organisations with the skills and knowledge they need to really take part in public sector work. We're also really honoured to be joined by Neil Hind. Neil's an old friend of our network who's previously been head of procurement at both NHS organisations and local government organisations. He's currently leading on the sustainable procurement for Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership, and supporting the North West region as well in general, and NHS England on their net zero ambitions. Finally, it's a great pleasure to be joined by Sally Williamson, who's currently category buyer for stationery at YPO and has significant experience as well as a buyer for facilities management and catering, first aid, workwear and PPE as well. So really warm welcome to all of you and thanks very much for joining us. Just a couple of very quick housekeeping items from me before we really dive into the topic then. You should be able to see that there's a chat box on the side of your screen where you can take part in any of the conversations today and ask questions to our guest speakers as well. This segment that you're watching at the moment is pre-recorded, but Gillian, Neil and Sally will all be joining us live in Net Zero Week, so we'll have a live Q&A opportunity at the end of this session as well. So yeah, if you put any questions, you have them in the chat box and we'll answer as many of those as we have time for at the end of the session. If there are any questions as well that you feel you didn't get answered or that you would like to ask following on from this week, if you just drop me or one of the YPO team an email, we're happy to broker introductions to the speakers and to pick things up after Net Zero Week as well. Finally, there should be a menu icon at the top of your screen to navigate back to the event pages and to see all the different events in Net Zero Week. Definitely go and check those out. There's loads of great sessions, great speakers, so please do check those out. Register and share them with colleagues as well. And if you're on social media as well, please do tweet on hashtag iNetworkNetZero and hashtag YPONetZero just to help us really spread the word and make sure that as many people as possible can really benefit from these sessions. So that's definitely enough for me, I think. So what I'd like to do now is to hand over to each of our guests in turn just to talk a little bit more about this topic from their perspective. So we'll start with Neil Hind, if that's okay, Neil. So could I ask you just to maybe tell us a little bit about the kind of product switching, recyclable materials journey that the NHS has been on, about your work that you've been involved in that, and what some of the key achievements and challenges have been in that?
So thank you, Louis, for that introduction. So yeah, I've got a couple of slides just go through for the next 5 or 10 minutes just to give a bit of background on what we're doing in Greater Manchester, some of our thinking, and some of the areas we are focusing on. So I think the background is quite important to this agenda. I think lots of other organisations have done, the Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership did declare an emergency with the climate in 2019, and that's enabled us for every organisation to have a plan on how they're going to become carbon net zero and more sustainable. because it covers such a wide agenda. We have got working groups looking at waste, fleet, estates, energy, logistics, theatre gases, inhalers, etc., etc. But looking at reuse and recycling is really a key area to a lot of the work we are doing. Hopefully, NHS England has also published a net zero plan. That was October last year, with an aim to be the first net zero national health service of anywhere in the world, with some quite ambitious targets. So looking at 2040 for our direct influence, and 245 where it's a wider supply chain influence, which is ahead of some of the other wider government targets. So how does this fit in with this agenda? About 1.4% of supply chain emissions in the NHS come from single-use devices. Many of those we could actually reuse and refurbish, obviously saving not both just carbon, but also much needed funding as well. And that net zero plan has a target of a 10% reduction of single-use plastics for the NHS. And some easier, maybe softer targets, such as a switch to 100% recycled content for all office-based paper that we are already on with. So obviously the NHS is a massive organisation, so there is a number of programmes now in place, both nationally at the North West level and at the Greater Manchester level as well, to help us implement these targets. So what is the size of the problem? Well, that picture there at the top, that is around 100 single-use items which are used in a standard cataract operation, and that's one of the most common operations done in the NHS. We do about 400,000 of those a year in England. So 400,000 times 100, the scale of the problem we're attempting to address. We also know around 30% of the waste is from our theatres, from the operations that go on. And we know, because of what we've been through during COVID, we have seen an increase in both single-use items and concerns around infection control, understandably. But you can see the figures there from an average bed, how much of it is plastic. And we're talking of over a tonne of waste coming out of the NHS per bed every year. So this is quite a lot for us to have a look at. So what are we doing? You're going to hear some more about this shortly, but we've looked at some of the easy changes. So the catering area was identified as possibly a quick win. We knew in Greater Manchester from some analysis, we were using about 800,000 plastic straws and stirrers, around 200 million knife forks and spoons. So we started to take those out. That's about 600 kilograms of plastic avoided. Not a massive amount, but it just gets people engaged. It helps people to see, a change which is being made in that NHS estate. We're also looking at reducing gloves. Obviously, we started this before COVID. We knew we were using about 140 million gloves a year, cost about 3.88 million, 600 tonnes of waste. So we're starting an educational piece to look at our gloves always being used in the right way. And one of the things has already been identified, that there are a lot of staff who are not patient-facing, who are using single-use gloves, and there could be some reusable alternatives that we're starting to investigate. Lots of wider equipment being used in the NHS, some of it may be more challenging. So looking at recycling walking aids, working on a pilot with NHS England. We want to get to at least 40% of walking aids being recycled, if not even higher. We've picked up walking aids because it's something that tends to go out into people's households. You might find them in your shed, in your loft. So can we get them out of your shed and loft and back into the system and being reused? Also looking at remanufacturing of equipment. Things have been single use in the past, but there are now organisations and companies out there which will buy those equipments back and take them away and either strip them down and recycle or even remanufacture and allow us to use them a second time or a third time. You'd also see there at the top of the screen, very specialist, but the trocars, which is a plastic port which is used in lots of operations. They tend to be single-use items, but there is a British firm now and other firms who are making reusable kit, and we've been actually testing these in surgeries, in theatres, with really, really good feedback. Obviously, during COVID, lots of increase of the use of PPE, and gowns was often in the news, but we worked with local suppliers in the Northwest and in Greater Manchester to move from a single-use gown to a reusable gown. And even with the cost of laundry and the power used and detergents being used, the evidence is showing we think this is better for the environment, and there is a cost saving there as well. And the last example on there is procedure packs. So if you go in for certain types of operations, there may be a pack of items which the theatre staff will take off the shelf for that operation. We found that there were often items in those packs that we never used, or used 1 in 10 operations. So, and also lots of single-use items in there as well. So we've been working with surgeons and theatre staff to look at the specifications of those packs, to take out items which are only used infrequently, or are there alternatives? So, for example, a paper pulp bowl or tub as opposed to a plastic one. Again, those are now being implemented, seeing some big environmental savings for our region. Single-use plastic is talked about a lot, so we've been looking at what are the top 100 items that we use in Greater Manchester hospitals. And this is a chart here. You can see your number of items on the left side. Obviously, some big numbers there. You know, millions and millions of these are used over the year. And we didn't really know, as organisations, what, when you're buying items off catalogues and you look at you might have an inventory management system, it's often quite difficult to identify what is a single-use plastic item on that list. So we've got a project underway. We've identified our top 100 and starting to work now down on that list, looking at the typical waterfall type process you see on the right there. Can we eliminate? Is it something we don't really need? Can we reduce? Can we reuse? Can we make it from something else apart from plastic? Or if we can't do any of that, is there a better way of actually recycling those items? I'm going to leave you with one example. It might seem a bit of an odd example, but I think it's a really nice one. You can see a number of football shirts are sold every year. So almost 20 million football shirts from the top 10 teams in season 18-19, and they often then end up going into landfill or in the bin or hung up on walls, for example. But a lot of these are held by the football teams themselves. So working with Manchester Fashion Institute and Manchester Children's Hospital, been looking at a quite innovative way to extend the usage of these football shirts that are coming from the clubs. And the idea was to upcycle these into a children's gown in the hospital. So this is underway as a pilot. Thank you to Puma who were involved in that. Gave 100 garments as a trial, and just in an email to say that they are going to give a lot more at the end of the season. Using a Manchester social enterprise back on track to take those gowns and actually manage the entire process. An organisation working with ex-offenders. Then using the prison service to do the alterations of the shirts, making them into the gowns. And then there is a steering group with Manchester Metropolitan University and these organisations just to make sure that it works and happens. So I'm going to leave you now with a very short video so you can see a bit more about this project.
conducted this research with the students to come up with the best design for a children's hospital surgical gown.
Speaking to the nurses, medical staff and parents of patients, we realised the positive impact our gown could have on young children in a hospital setting.
We acknowledged and addressed the environmental impact caused by the textile industry. Upcycling existing football shirts allowed for a more sustainable and considered outcome.
Working directly with industry partners and the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital, we've given football shirts a new lease of life, which we know will benefit young patients and medical staff.
That's fabulous. These gowns have all the functionalities a young patient needs, while also looking great. Our children and teenage patients are going to love them. Thank you, Man City, for these wonderful gowns. A great happy news story.
Thank you, Man City.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Neil. Really great projects on show there. I really love the football shirt project, actually. I'd love to see how that plays out. Please keep us in the loop, definitely. Definitely a bunch of questions coming out of that, I think, from the audience. I know I've definitely got some, but I think for now it'd be really useful to maybe go and get a perspective from Sally. I know that YPO have done a lot of work around some of those product switching issues, especially around single-use plastics, etc. So, Sally, if we could just bring you in, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about to what extent YPO is currently reviewing its products for sustainability and recyclability, and whether that's something that you've just started to do, or whether it's something that you've always done.
It's something we've always done, or at least while I've been there, it's just more prevalent now. So maybe 10 years ago, you'd get a supplier come along and they'd say, this is our new recycled product. It's less plastic, better source paper, things like that. Whereas now it's becoming just the norm. Now it's a case of we now use recycled plastic or use less plastic, and it's just going to get fed into your standard day-to-day lines. That's probably only really been in the last 5 years. It was more active maybe 2-3 years ago. Everything took a back step last year. But we're seeing it more and more, especially from a stationery side for myself and catering, which is where I work. Pens, they just are now made from recycled plastic. And the catering side has sort of had its hand forced a little bit to change. So yeah, it's something we've always looked at, but it's definitely been more so the last few years. And as customers become more aware of it, the more they ask for it, the more we have to look into it.
And is that going to, so conscious that we've got lots of legislative changes coming up around procurement, particularly we've had the new MPPS, etc. Is that something that's going to continue, do you think, or is that going to be impacted anyway by those legislative changes?
The biggest change I saw, and it is mainly from the catering side, because obviously where I've worked for the longest period of time, was April this year. Single-use plastic ban came in. Some of it was bans, some of it was new parameters in place. So certain items literally taken off the market, like your plastic cutlery. Other than that, there were things like you have to have less virgin material in there, or you have to have a certain percentage of recycled material in there, or your packaging had to change. So that made the biggest effect. We found the biggest effect in catering was that when you are making food, there is only one item that keeps food fresh and cold or warm, and it is plastic. So there isn't one product out there that just replaced it and made everything okay. And the stuff that was there would do one job really well and something else it wouldn't work for. And we found that was the difficult thing. The legislation, we knew it was coming, but actually getting things in place was more difficult. YPO as a start off, we looked at our range and literally discontinued everything that was single use. It was a case of, obviously we don't want to throw that away and dispose of it like that, because that's going against the whole reasoning for it. But we told customers back in 2019 it would be discontinued, and when it ran out, it was gone. It was that simple. We made our catalogue pages very obvious that if this is what you're currently buying, these are the alternatives out there. So when the plastic knives and forks were banned, we showed them the wooden knives and forks, we showed them plant starch knives and forks, and we pointed them back into the direction of usable metal knives and forks that you'd use every day at home. That way we were showing, look what we are getting rid of them, but look at the alternatives out there. But we still had a big educational piece out there for customers, because I don't think they were as ready as the market was for an alternative. Suppliers were ready, but they hadn't launched those products just yet at the time. But yeah, the single-use plastic ban was a big one that meant the whole range had to change and every customer was affected by it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned that suppliers to some extent were more ready for that. I mean, do you have any good examples of suppliers that have done some really great practice on this in particular?
We've had some brilliant innovation. Some of them have been, like I said, plant starch cutlery, which to look at you would say was just plastic cutlery, but not the cheap and nasty plastic cutlery that everyone's used to, and it breaks the minute you use it. It was thick and it was heavy duty, but it's literally made from plants, so it composts, and it's brilliant out, but it was a lot more expensive. We obviously then had the wooden cutlery, but everyone knows that taste of your food, so they're looking for alternatives. We have other suppliers who've come up with an alternative to polystyrene, so your general burger box and things like that. It looks like polystyrene, it keeps warm food, it doesn't leak, so you can have anything that's maybe slightly saucy or runny in there, but it's compostable. We've then had suppliers who've manufactured commercial dishwashers and extraction units for the kitchen, which as they take the steam in, you reuse that steam to regenerate it to basically power the machine. So the dishwasher will use its own steam to run itself. So it obviously better for the environment, but it's also better for your pocket, if you like, because it costs you less to run the machine itself. So there are a lot out there. There are a lot of things out there. Again, it's getting customers ready for it that has proved the struggle, because we've found our customers, as a lot of them they don't fully understand it, and we keep saying the education piece is there of what you can and can't do, or what you should and shouldn't do. Going on from that, it's a little bit like the compostable thing. We have had so many customers ring us and say, I want to get rid of all single-use plastic items, I want to be eco-friendly, I want to go compostable, without really understanding the full picture and the full life cycle of a compostable item, and that it's really not that straightforward. You need to be able to commercially compost it, not domestically compost it. In order to do that, it needs to be in a certain environment. Not everyone has that environment. The UK in general isn't very good at composting. Take out Scotland. Scotland are better than us, but still not the best. The product can't be contaminated with food waste, so therefore it's holding food. So is someone really going to rinse it before they put it in there? And if they accidentally put it in with the recycling's contaminated as well. And sitting with some local authorities and going through their requirements and what they want and what they can actually do were two different things, and the conversations could be quite difficult. We'd get so many authorities say, we want to go green, we want to get rid of all plastic, but taking into effect the fact that that authority doesn't actually compost or recycle the type of plastic they were using. Or you'd say you can rent or hire or even purchase a commercially compostable unit that basically sits on your facility, but then you look at how much a school may use in a whole year, and it's not enough. It wouldn't actually compost the way it needs to, because you haven't got the right environment and the right stuff in there. So we do keep pushing. Education is the key. Actually sitting down with us, we offer all our customers, come talk to us, we'll tell us what you want, we'll tell you what we can do, and if they don't work, I will speak to my suppliers and say, right, what else can we do for this?
Yeah, absolutely. Just thinking about, I guess, I mean, one of the huge priorities for, both public sector and private sector these past year and a half or so has been the pandemic response, right? And thinking about the role of procurement and buyers in that. I'm thinking particularly around, procuring a lot of that emergency equipment that we needed, things like PPE, a lot of which was kind of had to be single use, I guess, by design. I mean, just wonder whether, the pandemic has changed the conversation around any of this at all, or how that's had an impact.
It has. It definitely made people more aware. Everyone has spent the last 18 months prior to the pandemic saying get rid of single-use plastic, don't use plastic. If you can reuse it, do reuse it, or at least recycle it or dispose of it properly. And then obviously the pandemic hit and everyone's wearing masks, and like I said earlier, the gowns and everything that was having to be thrown away did mount up. I've been in some conversations where there again authorities and councils and people talk about what are we going to do with the waste, but I think we were in one of those catch-22 situations. We couldn't not take the single-use plastic, but at the same time, there was a need for it. It would have been nice if we had an alternative, but we didn't. It wasn't out there. The only thing I did notice from the catering side of it was they stopped serving food in single-use items. They started serving food in schools where the children were there, like you'd have at home, plates, knives and forks. And a lot of schools have said that way. A lot have said, actually, this works for us better. We've got rid of the plastic altogether. It gives more of a dining room feel to the children, which is great. But again, you have to then have the conversation of, do you have the commercial dishwashing facilities and a person to run that, and the cost of the water and everything else that goes around with it. So I bang on about the education piece of it, actually learning the bit in between of I want to do something fantastic and I want to get rid of plastic, and how you actually get there, because that's just not out there in the public eye to see.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're right. I think that education piece is really, really crucial, right? So no, thanks for hammering that one home. Definitely, I think. I mean, one of the pleasant stories, I guess, that came out of the pandemic was we did see more kind of local suppliers and SMEs and people like that stepping up and supporting some of those local supply chains around PPE. So we heard stories of small, medium-sized businesses changing their production from various items to manufacture PPE or other things, hand sanitizer, etc. And I just thought that was quite a nice segue to maybe bring in Jill at this point. I know, Jill, like Neil and Sally, you've got years of experience working in procurement in public and private sectors. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about thinking specifically about that kind of SME, VCSE perspective about this agenda from their perspective and how that's developed over the past couple of years.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Louis. So as you rightly mentioned, I'm representing a market development organisation today called Go for Growth. So we work principally with small to medium enterprises and the voluntary and charitable sectors to specifically help widen participation in the public sector. And what that means is that we're blessed and have had the opportunity and privilege to work with some really amazing smaller organisations. The SME community in the UK is a profoundly significant force. It accounts for something like 3/5 of the employment landscape, and there's around 6 million smaller organisations in this country, and they are responsible for about half the private sector turnover. But of course, the last 12 months has been dead challenging. Most statistics are suggesting that lots of smaller organisations might fall due to the pandemic. Some stats that the Federation of Small Businesses released recently suggested that 250,000 smaller organisations will fall due to COVID-19. And in a recent poll that they did, 23% of businesses said they'd had to cut staff numbers in order just to survive the pandemic itself. And there was another survey that I saw through BSI that said that 70% of business leader respondents had said that climate initiatives had had to pause due to COVID-19. And actually, there was a bit of an alter ego conversation that I had with a local authority recently where they said the opposite had happened. Actually, they'd seen the positive impact that the first lockdown had had specifically on natural resources. And so climate change actually had now elevated up the strategic agenda. So I think from both perspectives, as we look forward, in the heart of SME recovery has to be climate change as an agenda. But I talk about these things often, but there are, for me, I think, some key words that are important to unlocking the value that smaller organisations have to bring to any agenda, but this one equally so. And they are around collaboration and consistency. So all too often, I think high-level themes that are unified at a high level, like net zero, when they get distilled down into procurement level engagement, the actual ask is different between contracting authorities, or the message or the objective is, I don't know, not inconsistently applied, but differently applied. So whilst we're all trying to achieve net zero, the how of that might be different. And that can make it more difficult for the business communities and the charitable and voluntary sectors to come to the party. And so I think collaboration in the business community, so what are we doing as a collective, but also in the public sector to determine the net zero approaches and what the activities are that we're asking the marketplace to do, could be really key to our success. I think throughout my own procurement career, there's so much talent, so much creativity, so much innovation. And as you just mentioned with Sally, we saw real heart in the small business sector through COVID, the willingness actually to be part of these solutions. There's so much there, but it's often less visible to the public sector. And that makes it difficult for the public sector to harness all that the SME and VCSE sectors have to offer. And I can bring that to life a little bit actually through 3 examples. So one of the businesses that Go for Growth is working for, called Sistor, they're all about repurposing IT and circular economy. So they've recognised that we live on a planet with limited resources. And even in this fast-paced market called IT, they're working hard to change the narrative around IT waste. So there's a huge amount of plastic and rare earth minerals in IT equipment that's just too good to go to waste. So they're helping clients learn how to reuse rather than replace, and how to realise that IT is an asset that can be reused time and time and time again. One of the other businesses that we work with has a really core environmental mission around reducing plastic in the world's oceans. They're called Ocean Saver. So they've developed cleaning chemicals that can be sold plastic-free. So their cleaning solutions are plant-based and pet-friendly, and they can be used in both commercial application and domestic application. So their mission this year alone is to save 1 million plastic bottles from reaching the ocean. And then there's a social enterprise that I have had the privilege to work with called Office Odyssey. They have 2 core missions, a social mission and an environmental mission. So they sell sustainable inkjet technology. That's their core business. The product that they sell still remains reliable and productive in terms of its application in an office environment, but it also cuts carbon dioxide and plastic waste by over 90%. And their social mission, in addition, is to create opportunities for employment for people who might experience barriers to work. And they have a particular focus on the autism spectrum disorder and developmental learning disorders such as dyspraxia. And for me, what unites these businesses, as well as their social and environmental ambitions and their size and status, they're all smaller organisations, is that they want to grow in the public sector. They want to create more impact. They want to spread that message wider. But that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. And if we think about what I was just saying about the how of change, how are we going to do this? Then, that's probably why it's not so easy to do that consistently and to do that in a broad base. And that's one of the reasons that they've joined the Go for Growth programme. What I think they wouldn't say is that they are disproportionately more expensive than others, even with their social and environmental gains being at the heart of what they're doing. In fact, I know that they, at least some of them, are talking about upfront cost savings, but actually I think they would all encourage us to look at the whole life cost of a product. And that's where we would see lifetime cost advantages, as well as the other benefits that are brought to bear when you are using recycled or reused products. So as a procurement professional by trade, I can clearly see that these are exactly the kinds of businesses that we want to be answering bids in the public sector. They're exactly the organisations we want to meet or get to know, the organisations that we want to work with and learn from. But I come back to the same point in that all too often they're invisible to the public sector procurement process. And so I think there is a fundamental question, for me at least, around how do we actually physically close that gap? And maybe that's to do with the circular economy conversation, actually. Maybe that is was really getting to grips with how we change the linear nature of our industrial system, where now raw materials are used and products, byproducts and wastes are produced, and go from there to actually shifting to a cyclical system where the wastes are reused as energy or raw materials for another product or process. And there is a great example of this actually with waste coffee grounds. So there's a company called BioBean who take waste coffee grounds that would have previously gone onto landfill, and they turn it into biomass fuels for both consumer and industry. And I seem to think that they are powering London buses with this biomass fuel. And I've definitely used their coffee logs in my wood burning stove at home. And it's that kind of cyclical approach, I think, that will underpin our national ability or global ability to achieve net zero. But I think I do come back to my earlier comment. If there's all this talent and creativity and innovation in the marketplaces, but the public sector can't or isn't accessing these kinds of organisations, then surely we must be missing out. And I guess one final point from me a little bit is something that I debate as often as possible at a minute, and it's about how we use the procurement process to drive value forward. So bearing in mind the things I've said around market access, market accessibility, but also thinking about what's driving the procurement. So will we ever take price completely off the table in public sector bids and go to 100% value evaluation? And I don't feel like we should have to be brave to do this, but I guess also a little bit, it might take a brave organisation to be the first to try it. But I wonder what we think the result of it would be if we did take price off the table. Do we think the cost of supply would rise exponentially? Or would it perhaps give us the opportunity to see what the real cost of what we want to buy is? And if costs did go up, but that flowed through to our local economies, wouldn't that be a good thing? Because, you know, the big social outcomes like homelessness, worklessness, and poverty, I have a personal view that we're probably not going to change those things. We're certainly not going to eradicate them without a stable and growing economy. And so actually we need growth. We need more money coming in to do that. But actually maybe it's not about that, why we haven't taken price off the table yet. Maybe it's just too scary, or maybe the option is just too underdeveloped. And I have seen that some authorities and in some geographical areas are putting a minimum weighting on social value, sometimes up to 20%, and also just more recently on net zero in addition, 10%. And so actually that's a real improvement on where we've been up to press, I think, in some public sector procurement. But I guess I would still question whether it's enough. Do we know scientifically that those minimum weightings are enough? Will we save enough of the planet with a 10% weighting on net zero? Does everybody have to do it? Or how radical do we have to be in order to achieve net zero? I think we probably all know and agree that it will take the effort and commitment of all of us, every person, every business, every organisation. We're all going to have to be in it if we're going to win it. But how do smaller organisations specifically navigate that if there isn't one how? And I guess in public procurement, we have a duty to make delivering this as accessible as possible. So harnessing all of that existing activity that's already being undertaken in the marketplaces, baselining it, benchmarking it, engaging the market, and then solutionising. And so, you know, there's a question I kind of leave myself with is, are we doing things in quite the right order? There you go.
Fantastic, thanks, Jane. Great question to leave us on there. I think, yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, as we've got that push from public procurement to focus more on social outcomes, I think it's mutually beneficial, right, to engage much more closely with social enterprises, SMEs. So it's really great to have organisations like yours who are advocating for that. I think we are. I mean, again, definitely loads of questions coming out of that. I think the that price versus value question is something I'd really like to get Neil and Sally's thoughts on. But I think we will save that for the panel discussion. So for now, I'll just close this recorded section of the session. I'll say thank you very much to Gillian and Neil and Sally for this section, for joining us. Thanks to the viewers as well. Thanks for everyone taking part in the chat. We will switch the feeds over now. So if you do have any questions for any of the panelists, please do pop them in the chat box and we will try and answer them. But for now, we will, by the magic of streaming, we will disappear and then reappear, probably dressed differently, to answer your questions. So thanks everyone, and see you in a second. Okay, welcome back everyone. I think we are now live. We've got about 20 minutes for Q&A questions. I can see we've got loads and loads of good questions coming. I know that Gillian does have to leave at 12 sharp, so we'll try and get through as many as we can before that. So let's just dive straight in, I guess. I think something we mentioned just at the end of that recorded section, and one of the questions as well that somebody's put in the chat box is around building a business case around that price versus value debate. So the question is, how did you build your business case to enable investment into these more expensive products where they will not have associated savings? Did you have to quantify the environmental benefit in financial terms? So yeah, it ties into that price versus value thing, I think. I mean, I don't know, Neil, this is obviously a big question in the NHS, isn't it? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably challenge initially the concept that it's always more expensive. I don't think it is always more expensive. I think we've seen in some of the alternatives with things like knives, forks and spoons. Actually, there are now alternatives in the market which are cheaper than the plastic. So I think that does make it easier when the business case is both there is a financial saving and an environmental saving. There are examples though when it's either going to take investment or all products are more expensive, at least in the short term, and it's a difficult one. We haven't got an answer yet in the NHS. How do you give environmental savings, reduction in carbon output? How do you give that a cost with a business case? And I think organisations are just going to have to do the right thing in some cases. We'll take a leap of faith, which is what lots of people have done with things like say recycled paper. It's a small increase in cost in some cases, but everyone knows it's the right thing in doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sally, from a buyer perspective, IPO, would you echo that it's a difficult conversation, but one that needs to be had around value versus price?
Yeah, it definitely needs to be had, but I think you find more people are coming on board with it as well. And for those things that are more expensive, actually, the business or the customer or whoever's looking at it is already thinking environmentally. So the fact they're asking you about it, there's obviously an internal agenda, and if that's there, then if they've done any research at all, they know it could potentially be more expensive, but they're obviously wanting to move the business in that way forward. So actually, they're not always difficult conversations, but they are conversations that have to be highlighted.
Yeah, I mean, would you echo that, Jill? I know it was your point originally, I think, at the end of your session. Just are you reassured by that, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it is great to hear that there isn't, there's some myth busting that needs to go on in terms of that expectation that doing the right thing will always cost more. I agree with Neil. There's no evidence to suggest that is the case, but and in procurement, Sally's equally right. If the agenda is there, if we're getting the questions, then the ambition and the aspiration is there to start with. I think it's up to us as procurers to show the evidence and create the evidence that the right thing doesn't have to cost more in all cases, and where it does, actually, that's probably okay, or it might be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of it boils down to what's the cost of not doing net zero, right? It's a big question, isn't it? Okay, great. So we've got a bunch of questions, slightly more specific questions about people's individual presentations as well. So we'll kick off with those. First one for Neil, I think. So does Greater Manchester recycle the face masks? I heard that TerraCycle can recycle them.
Yeah. Really good question. I think the latest figures is, there's been over, I think, 1 billion single-use face masks used in the NHS over last year, which is obviously a massive amount, and who knows how long we'll still be using those at such high volumes. We have looked at that one, and it's one we're just evaluating now. We don't do it. It's one we're looking at. There's also now quite a few new entrants coming into the market around reusable face masks as well, and that is another one we are looking at. So can we move away from single use into multi-use?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Another one, I think, possibly for you, Neil, or anyone else would like to come in. Do you have any challenges from senior staff stating a need for a specific product as a favoured product or one that is more effective? How have you managed these challenges?
Yeah, I can certainly start on that one. So yes, and if you're having a new hip implant or a knee implant, you want the surgeon to be very happy with the implant is using and the equipment is using, and there's also a training issue. That's what they might have been had to trained on. But actually, what we're finding is, surgeons, theatre staff, those on the walls are really supportive of this as an agenda, and they are themselves identifying alternatives and sort of other things in the market. And I think, as I said, there is very, very sort of niche example, but the trocars I talked about, that's one that has gone through evaluation in theatres, and they really like it. They say, yeah, this is a good product, and we like it. We are more than happy in switching because there is those savings there. So yeah, it's. I think my advice is get them involved in the journey really early on, and don't attempt to force things on people.
Yeah, definitely. I think that engagement piece was a really strong message that came out of this morning's session on sort of health and social care, ICS roles as well. It was a really good session. We've got lots of questions coming in around compost and compostable materials, which I think came on the back of your piece, Sally. So the first one was, did you move to compostable alternatives? What opportunities are there for compostable products in preference to single-use plastics?
Yes, we moved to compostable products both within YPO and within the catalogue range that we offer our customers. There are loads of opportunities, but the first piece before you move to any product is to actually find out the manufacturer to death cycle, if you like, right through past what you're going to use it for, because I think the disposal of any of these products is the highest thing that gets overlooked, if you like. I've met with many customers who've said, right, we've moved over to compostable, we're doing the right thing, but they don't compost it, they just throw it in the recycle bin, and that actually is counterintuitive because the recycling can't be recycled either then. So if you can compost it, by all means move over to compostable. It's obviously one of the best things to use, and then the compost can be used elsewhere. Or my other advice for the single use would be to actually look at what is single use. Just because it's designed for single use doesn't actually mean it has to be. A lot of the little containers and pots that things come in from a catering perspective can be washed and reused. They can be. There's no reason to throw them straight away. Or again, I've seen a lot of customers, especially in smaller schools, moving back to crockery and cutlery, because that way nothing's getting thrown away afterwards, nothing's going in the bin. So yeah, there are opportunities for anything, but it's the full life cycle for what you're specifically using it for, not just jumping on the I want to do the right thing bandwagon, but if you don't know the full life of that product, you could be doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks, Sally. A follow-up question on that as well. With compostable products, is this industrial composting, brackets requiring bulk collection and processing, or would it work in a normal garden compost pile or bin?
Okay,
Sally,
there are two differences. There are two differences between composting. There's domestic composting and industrial composting. So what you do in your garden, yes, things will compost on there, but the environment you need to reach what environmental cost composting is different. If something says on it will industrially compost in 30 days, that's in an industrial unit. You can put that on your composting heap at home, but it will take a lot longer, and we're not just talking about 45, 50 days, potentially a year or two, depending on what the product is, because an industrial composter brings in the right amount of moisture, the right temperature, the right amount of light or lack of light, if you like, to make it do it that quickly. It won't do it like that at home in a domestic compost heap.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. Another great question on composting. In Bristol, we have an issue that all local facilities have carbon and food going for anaerobic digestion rather than composting. Have you invested in on-site composting, or do you have composting services that you use locally?
Well, we were just talking about this before we came on. Basically, it's a vicious cycle. So we as a whole, can get industrial compost units that you can either rent or buy and have on site. You can have them, but the return on investment and what they're designed for is different. So they're designed for basically a local authority who's collecting from houses weekly. So build up and gradually that will all compost down. Got to think from a school, an average school only has, say, 50% of children who are actually eating the school meals, and maybe only 20% of those are in takeaway containers. Most primary schools eat in a canteen, and therefore it's not in compostable product at all. The amount of product that school is going to put in the composter over a year is nowhere near what they're designed for. So the amount they cost the school in relation for what's actually getting composted is really against itself. Basically, the argument is local authorities need to build composting units across the country so everyone can compost. But they can't do that while other people aren't using composting products because they cost millions and millions of pounds to build. If you're not buying the compostable products, they're not putting them in it, so the units aren't being used, but then people aren't buying the compostable products because the units aren't there. So there needs to be something higher up the chain that says we need to start doing this as a country, because it's not one or two local authorities that are doing it. The UK across the whole isn't very good at it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Thanks. Just a final question on compost around specific products. So somebody's asked, is compostable cutlery only compostable if it's put on a compost heap? So I guess this is compostable, biodegradable in any setting, I guess, the question.
Yeah, well, there's a difference between compostable and biodegradable. So a compostable product will biodegrade. Anything biodegrades, even plastic bottles, everything, any plants, anything that we're out there biodegrades. It's just about how long it takes to do that. Composting is different. It's an actual scientific, man-made procedure. Like I say, it needs the right amount of light, moisture, it needs to be in the right environment, and that's composting. So no, it won't compost if you put it on a compost heap or in your garden or anything like that. It will biodegrade, but if you want it to actually compost, it needs to be in a composter, which, like I say, there are domestic and industrial, and they're different to each other as well. But yeah, anything will biodegrade anywhere, but to compost, it needs the right environment to put it in.
Yeah, no, thanks. That makes sense. So moving on from compost questions, we do have a couple. We have a specific question on TerraCycle, actually. So are there any corporate links or opportunities with organisations like TerraCycle? I think we did mention them previously. They seem to have found a gap in the market, but is the public sector harnessing this? I don't know if anyone on the panel has worked with TerraCycle or would like to come in on that one. Neil or Sally, possibly?
YPO have worked with TerraCycle. I'll be honest, outside of my remit, so I'm not 100% sure on it. I can find out. Obviously, everyone that did do it still works there. So if there's any specific questions, I can find out. From my understanding, TerraCycle only allows so many pickup points, and I think they've potentially near or reached the limit of the understanding I have. They've reached the limit of what that is, so it's hard to get on board. I know YPO tried to become a national pickup point, if you like, where every time YPO delivered or picked up from a school, we could pick up their product and then get TerraCycle to pick up from us, but the uptake wasn't great. Whether that was down to it not being used, it not being utilised properly, or it not being advertised very well, I don't know. But I know it's still there and it's something that can still be used, but my understanding of it's limited.
Yeah, I think very similar on the NHS side. It is a product which is available and has been looked at, but I don't think it's had a huge amount of take up yet.
Great, thanks both. So just conscious that we've got about 5-6 minutes left. Got a couple more questions. So there's one specifically around, I think directed at you, Neil, but also ties in with some of what Gillian was saying around involving social enterprises. So there's a question here: how did you get the social enterprise involved with the football shirts example? Did the lead come from the uni? Don't don't know if Neil, you want to comment on that one first?
Yeah, I mean, we're I guess very fortunate in the region that there's a really good network with business growth as an organisation, linking in with third sector organisations. The sort of Manchester Fashion School, which actually led on it, has actually brought in other organisations to to move this from a pilot, into being an ongoing, sustainable type of project. So I think the big learning here is that it's important that we do start to build up the networks of organisations that can help and support and to move these things forward. I think that's them. They can have a life of their own.
Yeah, and I mean, Julian, you're very much in that space, right? So I mean, just on a general point in terms of engaging with social enterprises, did you want to come in on that one around the importance and how we can do it better?
Yeah, I think one of the things we encourage public sector organisations to think about is what's the path of least resistance to engaging with social enterprises, and actually the SME sector and the VCSE sector more widely. How engaged currently are they with the public sector and those opportunities? How do you build that network? How do you talk to them? What are the gaps? What sectors are they in? And how do you make the information that you need to get out relevant and proportionate and easy to digest and respond to? And that is, there isn't one quick answer to that. That's a multi-channel, multi-level engagement model to build a network. And that's using existing membership organisations like Federation of Small Businesses or Chambers of Commerce or other trade associations, and accessing those business members or social enterprise members that way also.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jane. There's another question actually that's just come in around SMEs. So there's a question here. As SMEs are mainly locally based, which is obviously great for the local economy too, is it a big ask for local authorities to baseline, benchmark and solutionize? And where do you see this sitting in the solution? I don't know if, Julian, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so local for me has two strands to it. So local is, of course, place-based. And so actually baselining what your procurement looks like from providers that are in that local boundary is one thing that we would definitely encourage. But local is also about impact. So it isn't necessarily about putting a wall around a boundary and saying, actually, we only want to work with providers in a local area. It's thinking about how to get the best local impact. And that's a bit more challenging from a baselining perspective, but it's definitely doable. And I'm generally of the opinion that if you want to think about your journey to point B, you have to first understand, measure and define your point A, your starting point, so you know what today looks like, and then you can start to think about defining tomorrow and what the process of going from one to the other is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joan. We do have a bunch more questions coming. I'm conscious that Joan, you do need to drop off at 12, don't you? I think if you do need to drop out at any point, I'll just say thank you very much for joining at this point. But if you can stay, then you're more than welcome to as well. But we'll just we'll try and answer a couple more of these, I think, because they're really great questions. So there's a question around. So some plastics are carcinogenic, i.e. water bottles. Wouldn't this apply to catering plastic pots also? I don't know if Neil or Sally had any thoughts on sort of the carcinogenic element of plastics and what things are and aren't, etc.
Yes, some are. Yeah, some aren't. It's some of the owners have to go back on the manufacturer to obviously make things in better product, I suppose. And obviously, if things can't be reused, then it goes back on the end user to recycle them. If things are getting recycled, then obviously that's better than not. So yeah, some products are, and it can apply to some of the catering pots as well, but not all of them. And we do also have alternatives that are reusable and recyclable. Polycarbonate products are very much like normal crockery, but made of plastic, but they can be reused for years. Polycarbonate is actually recyclable at the end as well, so that is an option for people.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. There's a question here on sort of construction and infrastructure. I'm conscious that we don't have local authority colleagues on the call, but I think there's an interesting general question that comes out of it that ties into some of the business case stuff that we spoke about before. So there's a question here that says, in construction or highways as examples, many recycled materials do still cost more, and without quantifying the benefit, it's hard for local authorities to justify the costs with such limited budgets. Any general advice on dealing with this where we want to make the right choice but cannot afford to? I don't know, Neil, if you wanted to comment on that one from your experience in the NHS.
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult one. I think this is going to come down to, leadership and the willingness of the organisation. I think we're starting to obviously see now a shift in, what the organisation is thinking about and where it wants to focus. And I think there's just going to have to be, it sounds like in that example, an understanding that if we do want to reach our carbon targets and, and do the things that we've all said we're going to do, then, there are times it could cost us actually more money. And, and organisations are just going to have to accept that. I mean, I would hope over time that, more organisations which are buying these products, I think it always shows that they will drop in cost at some stage, and it might be that as other products then end up actually more expensive, and it's a very, very easy business case.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks, Neil. The question on around academy schools, and again, I'm conscious we don't have local authorities on the call, but I wonder if Sally, I know YPO work quite closely with schools, don't they, in terms of products. So there's a question here around, does the development of academy schools impact on local authority achievements, recyclable products as they buy their own products? So a question around, I guess, is it, how does academy schools play into this?
So far, we saw that it was actually the academies that were leading on it. I found when working with authorities and academies, the academies were going to the authorities and saying, actually, we want to do this with your support, and actually we think you should be doing it for the whole of the schools that you cater for. So actually, they do seem to have that agenda already to want to go do it from the few I've worked with. Obviously, I couldn't say nationwide, but I know that, a couple of authorities I've worked with were actually being pushed from their larger academies to do it across the board.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. I think that's all the questions we've had from the audience, and we're just pretty much bang on time, 1 minute over, I think. So unless there's any final ones that come in the next few seconds, I'll just say a massive thank you again to Gillian and Neil and Sally for giving up their time, both today and for the pre-recording as well. I've really enjoyed hosting it. I hope everyone who's joined has enjoyed it as well. So a massive thank you to the three of you and to everyone who's joined. We really hope you enjoyed it. Please do check out the rest of the sessions as well. Really would encourage you to check out this afternoon's sessions and tomorrow's sessions. We've got some great ones coming up, some great speakers. So do get involved and join the conversation on social media as well. If you're on there, we're at #YPONetZero and #iNetworkNetZero. So in the meantime, thank you very much again to everyone, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.